Back in 2020, a new friend of mine, had said this line to me in random. We were sitting there smoking a bowl of weed, and he said, "Dude, why don't you do what you love?" And caught off guard, considering I've never heard someone talk to me in such a way, I asked him what he meant. And he said, "You love helicopters, dude, why don't you fly them?" Me knowing the full context of what I loved about them and why I love them, knowing I couldn't say it because apparently people have very weird perceptions when one knows the depth of one thing and the other doesn't. They have a very simple comprehension of it. And that was at a time where I hated myself. I wouldn't say, how about this? I like who I am, but I don't like the environment we're in. And I said we. I don't like what society is doing to us. This is about love, passion, whatever is the aiming point in your head, or better yet, the place in your life that you go to that allows all time to just vanish. You have no concept of it. And in my case, I'm pretty picky about that. And to understand it more, I literally had to kill it. Because in the beginning, as I mentioned, my friend, in the beginning when my passion was developed, I wasn't social, meaning it was there to suit other aims, with no guarantee that it would ever come to fruition, meaning my aim of perhaps my interest in something uniting me to others. In most cases, in many of the cases, the interest in it only united me to people that were just as lost as I was, trying to hide behind that as a facade. But in my mind, I was spending every waking minute thinking about it, comprehending it, learning about it. I described in one post once that after a while, it was like I had a very surface level understanding about aerospace being my interest and aerodynamics. I'd have a very surface level understanding of it. And then as my curiosity grew, with it came more knowledge about it so that I understood more of what was going on, and then I'd have to rewrite what I thought was right because I found out it was wrong. And that's the changing of understanding, basically. But the weird part about that friend saying that to me about why don't I do what I love, and the one thing that caught me off guard was him saying, "I wish I loved something as much as you." And I've had 3 years to think about that. And the biggest takeaway is I'm sure he loves something, he just doesn't know what to call it. Because otherwise, if there's nothing to love, he wouldn't be here. My passion was started at the age of, I guess I could say it was around 7 years old. 7 years old to 14 when it really took off. It was initiated when I would go with my grandmother to this local airport and we would watch planes taking off and landing. That's where it grew, and that's where it stopped initially. I remember days in my past of reading this old rocketry book by Wernher von Braun, not knowing anything about who wrote it, nothing. Just wrote it and read it, just looked over the pages, the pictures, just interested in it. Of course, I developed this knack for understanding mechanics of things. And little did I know that that interest in mechanics would go into how people work, why we work, how we work, why we do what we do, what are we hiding. And better yet, what is causing the problems. The biggest curse of this, just a sidetrack, is the biggest curse of that is when you want to focus on an issue, you have to overcome your issues to be able to focus on them more with more clarity, because otherwise your current problems are clouding you trying to figure out a different problem. It's kind of like trying to go to work figuring out issues even though your marriage is in shambles. It would be stupid to say that that doesn't have an effect on the workplace or on your work ethic. Kind of like the reason why people absolutely hate work these days, or life in general, is because that work-life balance is a fucking misnomer. There's none of it. So people have very, very shitty home lives, and then they go to work trying to just make it by, and then caught by the stress of other people in the same shoe. So then, because we're so separate from one another, we just show hatred, judgment, resentment, all these nasty things to each other, because we're all suffering in our own unique little shell, which is only there because these things are here. But on the topic of love and passion, so after a while, the biggest thing about this is, like, most people construe sexuality with love, and the most profoundly upsetting, jaw-dropping bullshit fact I had to stumble upon was the realization that sexuality and our sexual natures as being men and women was never to be construed as love. It was never to, like, seek love. It just is. But when you're seeking it, who's to wonder why it never works? And in modern times, have fun, especially when it's in the aims of saying you love somebody. What I've realized is, because we're so separate now, is one side, put it like men versus women, one side barely can comprehend what the other is thinking. Not to mention the limited amount of experience they have allows them to generalize the rest of them. Happened to me. And it's funny because when I was socially insecure, I was afraid of that happening. But when I lost my social insecurity, it happened. I was just like, oh, that figures. And it's stupid to think, like, for the last few months, I've been thinking, like, my interest, my love, my passion for aerospace or anything regarding it was fake. It wasn't real. Reason being was because what motivated my interest, actually, it went past the point of no return for me psychologically. It was, or before. It was before that, sorry. Which means it started before I really got fucked in the head by the system, which was the main motivation to me making this channel, was being diagnosed with Asperger's and trying to explain what the fuck that is. It's not so damn easy, considering we live in very unique lives, because we have different families, different financial backgrounds, different areas, different friends, different interests, all these different devils in the details. And brain just flew away. Because for a while there I was questioning on if that was even real. On if my interest was actually real or if it was just put there. Fact of the matter was, I was curious and it was amazing. Like, if anybody looks at a plane and they're just like, meh, don't talk to me. Either that or they just haven't been pulled to it. It's kind of like the same allure SpaceX has for a lot of people. It's just like, ooh, rocket. Same thing. It's like a driving force. I even just said today, like, there's a synonymous relationship between theological religions and New Age religions, and one of them being, like, SpaceX. You can consider any fanboy about SpaceX a part of a religion. It's just not said that way, because their aim is the same. Their interest is the same. And that was the main purpose to religion in the first place, was to unite us by a collective aim. Before the digital age, it was easier to be involved in that. After it, that's when everyone's attentions and aims just scatterbrained. And then that's when people started questioning things and looking things up, and then getting depressed because now all of a sudden loneliness ended up being a big ass void that just opened up the moment social media became a thing. Not saying that was a case back then. It's worse now. And then, of course, it's validated by just how isolating this planet can be at points. I've spent, I wish I had the exact number, maybe more than 10 years alone, and I used to think that was just who I was until I realized it was the belief system in my brain that said I wouldn't be able to be social until I became social, and then I learned what that actually meant, was being social. Context about love there is I had to lose my passion for aerospace because after 20 years of nurturing this interest in aerospace with nobody to tell me no, that's all my mind knew. And when my failures, because of course when you're socially insecure and you go into a egotistical environment like aerospace, doesn't mix up so well. Of course I can be here now saying this, but back then I was not assertive. I was just a kid. And for a longer period of time than most, for what are obvious reasons to me. But I had to literally lose that interest to the point where I lost all hope in life. And by that I mean all hope. I had no hope, no jobs that would ever bring me meaning. And it's funny how I think about my life, and I'm sure a lot of people would find it similar if they ever heard this. It's like I found slivers of what I wanted. It was never all in that one pie everyone wants. It's always in slivers, pieces of it. And then it's your job to figure out what piece of that pie belongs in your end game pie until that one piece clicks it all together. And then you've got your pie in your head. And then you got to deal with reality trying to get that pie again. Main reason I say that is because, of course, I had aviation. That was a big part of that pie. I had that social distance between me and other people, which made my emotional emphasis on aerospace even more important, but not in a stance of maturity. In most cases, I was just running from my circumstances, which, poor family, not to mention running from home at 22 because my mother got addicted. And doing that was a hell of a lesson, I will say that for certain, but it just caused my mind to drive more into my passion. Now, the one thing I've learned, because I had such an emotional passion towards aerospace unlike anybody else, and that's not a brag, when I would get jobs around aerospace, something stuck out to me when I was 20s, is how unpassionate people were. And they were very few that were, but a great majority of them had no interest in it. If anything, it was kind of that like artificial angel sense of being, like, just because they're around it, people ascribe value to it. It's kind of like me saying I'm interested in aerospace to a stranger, and they automatically assume I'm a pilot. They're trying to see a way of how I'm useful to them by means of saying, oh, so you must be wealthy. Yeah, I wish. But after working in the Delta Airlines hangar and other jobs around aerospace, it was a mix of egotism and just work. A lot of it was just work, but then a majority of it was egotism, and I'm just sitting there being this dumb kid that had no ties to aerospace, which was a big key part about my life, because the weird part is that it stuck for so long without having any ties to it, because that very early on started to set in a distinct amount of hopelessness about it. All me, no help, no mature family to point me in the right direction. It was all me, which made me god awfully blind. And then I got to look at every other family that had their kids, and then they would end up being pilots, and I'm sitting there. Well, now I'm sitting there going, like, glad I'm not an airline pilot, because I wouldn't like that job to save my own ass. Passions are weird things, because it's like, it can be social media, finding attention, or video games. That's a big one because that's another one that's kind of dangerous in a really like perspective of valuing life and then living life. Because in most cases it's used as like a medicine to distract yourself from reality. Distract yourself from actually living life because something in life can become so daunting, you seek that point of numbing time or your sense of time. And video games provide that pretty well. Same with doom scrolling or whatever the digital age gives you. And if that can be a use to both yourself and the world, then there's value there. If not, start questioning it as soon as fucking possible. Because if video games are like starting to wear on you, start questioning it. And just imagine what would change in your life if you realized what it was and what it was doing to you. Of course, I'm sitting here after having just like binged a few videos of old games that I used to play, putting myself back into my old states of mind, and it was just weird because they're so alluring, so captivating, and then hours go by, and then nothing's ever done. It's like, I think humanity is reaching this point where there's going to be half in delusion and half in reality, and the part of humanity that's going to be in reality is going to be very few. A very small percentage of the mass. And pretty soon that's going to die off to zero because the digital age. Because I feel like at some point the digital age will be regulated to only show what fits the status quo of whatever humanity needs at that given time. And I feel like that's already being done. But back when I was 15, I started flying gliders. And that's when my interests really started getting physical, meaning intimate with the articles instead of just in my head thinking planes. I was seeing them and being with them, like they're people or something. And then that was also a strange time because, of course, that's when puberty hit. Now, a key part about my life and the reason why I was trying to piece it together saying I fell in love with aviation before I got fucked in the head. The reason I say that I got messed up in the head was because at around 8 years old, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and placed in special ed from that point on until 11th grade, where I just quit high school. But when I was 15 in 7th grade, I started flying gliders. And then I reached sexual puberty. And then my attention started going to girls, but unfortunately, because I'm still a naive little kid, trying to conceptualize something that my parents never bothered to talk about, nothing. Luckily, I guess, for sake of the argument, I was put in special ed because it delayed my ability to, or delayed, it put a blockade in my ability to be socially hypnotized by the comings and goings of social life, which filled me with tremendous negative emotions for so long because I always thought it was me as the problem instead of, I mean, in some cases it was the psychological perception that was molded because of my lived reality. And after, like, meeting the first girl that I had an infatuation with, that any resistance in that forced my brain to look more into aerospace. And then from there on, it was like a snowball effect, where all hopes of everything I ever saw in the past that I wanted were strung up on aerospace. And that's when my life got weird. When that hope was gone, I suddenly became social. And then I started seeing beyond the veil that I didn't see before, because of course on social media you see everyone's happy and you're sitting there isolated, depressed, and alone. And then I started seeing beyond that veil, and I started getting tastes of things I never had before, like 2020 being my first kiss, first date, motorcycle rides with a woman. It was absolutely enjoyable. And the weird part about that, after nurturing this mind that was so alienated in the past, it was like reality was going to war with the hell in my head. It was saying, like, guess again, motherfucker. It's not as bad as you think it was. It was yourself that was believing it. But also, I always forget about this, is time and place, because that was not going to happen in the cities. The only reason this actually worked out was because I moved back to my hometown. Last thing I ever wanted to do, last thing I ever thought would ever provide this, because I'm living with my mother and completely just on the down low. I felt about that big. And that was the last time I'm ever going to just hide my insecurity by chasing women. I wasn't like that. So that kept a blockade up. Like, that's why I was so shy of ever approaching or anything like that. But that creates a hell of a psychological tension, because then you always think you're gonna need this money, this car, this stuff, all to get those things. Until my mind snapped and said, you don't need any of it. It's the world that tells you that. But then you deal with the repercussions, because then everyone else is holding you to the same standards they are judging themselves by. So it just becomes this, like, bug caught on a spider web, basically, which is what 2020 was like for me. But the flying the gliders, and I will admit to all the adults that knew me when I was like 15 or younger and older, I was a quirky kid. I remember everything I did. That's kind of the curse of me right now, is that I remember every little movement throughout my life as far as I was conscious. Which I guess I could say my memory started getting really good at about 7th grade because of that curse. But then being in special ed for those 8, 9 years motivated this mind that would just be racing nonstop, just always trying to think through things. But I was so unconscientious and so, how would I say, fixated on the surface level of wanting to know everything I could about aerodynamics, but having not one bit of social connection or networking skills. It doesn't work well in America, because if you're socially disconnected to any rate, good luck to you. That's kind of the point I want to address. But being social for the first time in 2020, it was weird because, of course, in the beginning, I did it for my own aims, trying to figure things out, and of course I figured them out. I got what I wished for. But at the cost of really understanding this, like, thing about human memory perception and dark times, like the drug stuff going on in my family back in the day. It developed this, like, negative thought process or mind that I had over this town. And anytime I would come to this town, or anytime I was in it, it would always be tainted with this, like, dark veil of drug addiction and everything, until it almost feels like that cloud is now me. Like, I figured out why it's there. I figured out what's pushing it, what's causing it. And I think a lot of it comes down to human attention and where we're spending most of our time. One thing I wanted to address, and I'm going to probably write about it a bit and probably make a video going into more context, is I like this, get this, I like this idea about an idea. Human communication was supposed to work in this way, where it's two people with the idea at the center. The basically think of it like a ghost. We're supposed to talk about the ghost at the center, because it's not real, it's not in front of us. It's a thing. It's an idea. It's something you discuss, obviously. Modern times, that idea has vanished. The ideas we talk about are each other. And the more I think about that saying, the more real it becomes, because it's the reason social gossip is all the rage right now, because we're so separate from one another. We can't figure out why we're suffering, but then again, we're going to go to our phone and talk shit about our neighbor. Or talk shit about the guy that went insane in 2020. Thank you, Osceola. I'm tired. I just want a break. I don't think there's ever a break. Not until you're 6 feet under. But the one thing I learned about human perception is it's mold. You're molded into whatever perception you have, and it's your job, if you're in a bad place, to undo what's been done in a negative way. Most people, it's kind of weird because this society, like, how would I call it? It like cultivates psychopathy, psychopaths, people that use you for things that don't say why they're using you. You're just useful to them, and you have no idea why. It's like they know your weakness, you don't know your weakness, but they're using it. And there's a lot of people like that in this world. And I think you could think of like a corporation like a psychopath. It doesn't have any give a shits about you, your well-being, your life, your stature, none of it. As long as you check all the boxes required to be in that organization, then you'll be a part of it, while it's exploiting you for your energy, paying you what you agreed upon. And in most cases, I'm saying now, it's like, unless I'm paid $35 an hour, fuck off. Because I'm done. There's no point to this. We're at a perfect time in human history for like America to reach a state of balance where we're not eating each other alive, where our self-perceptions aren't driving us to try and go numb through natural means, through like drug addiction or alcoholism. It's another curse about it is like, of course there were times I wanted to just numb myself, but because I was unsocialized for so long, I never developed that knack or that ability to get drunk, because anytime I get drunk, it's always my real self that comes out, and it's not kind. It's not mean, but it's not like I go numb and then I'm just a happy, giddy little dumbass that's drunk at the bar. I become the person that people don't want to see, because, of course, they don't want to see it. They're running from themselves, too. I'm not running from myself. There's only so much you can say until it has literally no power. Because then everyone just expects you to fall in line just like the rest of them. And where is that leading us? Straight to hell. Straight to hell. Devoid of any passion, any purpose, any aim, except for the self, because that's what the digital age does. We're all ones and zeros now, instead of this collective. And the only aims that we have in common is probably looking at LCD screens more often than we look at each other's eyes. And that's a sad thing. It is what it is. You can blame me, you can blame yourself, you can blame who created the digital age. It was destined to happen. And then the government just exploits that too, because the government is just about as psychopathic as the worst organization on the history of the planet. The one thing I don't like is how they perpetuate in history classes is like, oh, that was the Dark Ages, like World War II or something. And that was fine, that was dandy. It happened, we learned from it. Did we? I don't think we have, because I don't think people understood the psychology of being in a place and how easy an idea can get you to hate your neighbor under a false premise. Or better yet, how an idea can get you to hate yourself under a false premise. Like how being socially estranged for so long had me hating myself because I felt that big. Little did I know, if I just stayed alive long enough, which I did, regretfully so, that once I became social, I realized all of it was bullshit. Because it was like the missing link. I've seen enough of life. I've worked my ass off trying to stay alive. And then that just bled dry, because of course there was no balance in the life. There was no place to look forward to going to after work. It was all just work, go to sleep, work, go to sleep, work, go to sleep, and then in between trying to numb myself as much as possible. Not through drugs, but through actions or building things or playing video games. And that's why there's no balance. And the more that people start realizing this, the more we can realize we have an effect on everything that happens. And the more we learn about what hell actually is, the more we can stop our downward spiral into collective state of hell. I'd say it's safe to say we're still there, and it's not going to come out, we're not coming out of it easy. because we argue that we can call this a civilized society. It's not. That's the most blatant lie I've ever heard in my entire life, is calling what we currently live in civilized. Look in the past year of everything that's gone on in this country and call that civilized, and see if you still call yourself real. I don't know if this has gone on long enough. Do I have anything I want to finish with? Not really. I'm tired of my hometown. I'm tired of 2020. Just complain because I'm a jackass. And I'll stop fidgeting and call this video good. I'll upload this and see what happens. Have a good day, folks.